The ceasefire with Iran is over. What was supposed to be a historic, generational peace agreement that was signed and then really to be hammered out over the next 2 months ended in 3 weeks. I have read on my counter that lasted longer than that. The president made that announcement during a trip to Turkey to meet with our European allies that didn't exactly go as planned for the U.S., and the president left, by most accounts, weaker than when he arrived. It's Thursday, July 9th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Hermes. So Trump is back in the U.S. today, but yesterday he was in Turkey for a meeting with our NATO allies. That's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the military organization that was put together after World War II that was essentially there to stop a Russian invasion of Europe. How that works is an attack on one NATO country is an attack on all of them, meaning we all have each other's backs. That is expensive. For some context here, Trump doesn't like NATO, but he also doesn't seem to understand it. The way it works is every country pays 2.5% of their GDP towards NATO, so kind of like a country's income, kind of. That money then goes to supporting defense projects and programs and overall military initiatives. The U.S. spends 3.5%, importantly here, by choice. We, after World War II, were left as the only major Western superpower and have paid extra to have military bases in countries all across Europe, and in turn, those countries do get some security from our military being there. For decades, this has been a huge source of U.S. military and diplomatic power. The might of the U.S. military speaks for itself as a deterrent against invasion, but so does the power of the U.S. dollar that comes with having those bases in those countries in just pure investment in local, regional, and national economies. Trump, however, sees this as the U.S. getting ripped off. He seems to think of NATO like a country club where everyone pays dues and then should get the same services, or if you take the Barb McQuade approach, which we should, who I had on the show a few weeks ago, Trump sees this like a mob boss, as a chance to shake down Europe to strong-arm them into things like the Iran war, into following Israel's lead to a Middle East takeover, and into supporting the administration's efforts to expand across the Western Hemisphere like it's the 1800s again. During his last visit with the NATO countries, he got them to agree to double their investment to 5% by 2035, which most of these leaders know that Trump will not be around anymore, certainly as president, maybe not at all, and many of them won't be around as leaders either, and likely this deal won't hold up. If it does, they'll probably fudge some numbers and just call some bridges and roads defense initiatives, but either way, this thing isn't going to be the 5% that Trump thinks it's going to be. The only country that didn't agree to the 5% was Spain, and that led to this absolutely bizarre statement from Trump yesterday.
Spoke to Italy. I didn't speak to Spain. Spain is a wasted cause. We don't want to do any trade business with Spain anymore, by the way. I'd like you to cut it off. Spain is a terrible partner in NATO. They don't participate. They don't pay. I don't want anything to do with Spain. Cut off all trade with Spain, please, including visits. Okay, we don't want anything to do. Watch them come running back. Oh, they'll come running back.
So if you're not watching this on YouTube or on the Substack, Trump is sitting next to the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, and is talking to Secretary of Trade, Scott Bessent, who's just off camera. Now, first of all, the U.S. doesn't do a ton of trade with Spain. We buy things like some pharmaceutical drugs, olive oil, industrial electronics, wine. I like Spanish wine. They buy a lot of pharmaceuticals from the U.S., a lot of oil and gas from us, and medical supplies, including vaccines and, believe it or not, blood, which I did not know was a thing you could just buy. But overall, we had an almost $6 billion trade surplus with Spain, meaning we were making money, and now we aren't. So we actually lose out on this choice to go no contact with the Spanish. On top of that, we have two joint military bases there. Both are in the southern part of the country called Andalusia, a naval base in Cadiz, which looks like a pretty good gig if you can get it, and another smaller air base that is nestled in the Spanish mountains of Seville. Also not bad. But they're also vital transport hubs for NATO and U.S. military operations in Africa, and because of this, Spain could just decide to end our lease on their land and kick us out. Obviously, this is all just Trump doing that mob boss thing, but on a global stage, we've seen that hasn't worked very well for us under this administration with any country except maybe Venezuela, and even that hasn't gone totally according to plan. But that wasn't the only shock at this NATO meeting. Trump went all in on Greenland again, this time getting pretty agitated over the idea that the U.S. at one point owned the island and then gave it back to Denmark.
I mean, just so they understand, Greenland is very important for the United States, but it's not important for Denmark. In fact, when Denmark was overrun by the Nazis in less than one day, Hitler beat them out in one day, took over. They asked us to take care of Greenland. In fact, we took Greenland, and then stupidly we gave it back. We shouldn't have given it back to them because we're the ones that need it. We need it for protection of the world, not just the United States. And it's very important. It doesn't help Denmark, but it helps us.
Yeah, so that is not how this happened, at all. The U.S. never owned Greenland. We didn't take it. We did help Denmark remove Nazis and a Nazi weather base and several outposts from what was still Danish-controlled Greenland while Denmark was occupied by Germany in World War II. We did that with literal sled dogs, but that didn't make it ours. And either way, this push for Greenland for Trump isn't really about the international security piece he keeps talking about. I've written about this before, but it's about oil and rare earth minerals below the surface of Greenland, even if they're practically impossible to get to, according to most people who study these things seriously. He wants essentially the prospecting rights or the rights to sell the rights. It's been a part of how his sons and members of his cabinet have been operating all over the world and making a lot of money doing it. But that wasn't even the last of it on this trip, which was barely 36 hours. Trump later had a meeting with President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, except when they were taking questions, he didn't call him that.
Do you have a question for President Putin, please?
You heard that right. That is the American president calling the president of Ukraine, an allied country, the name of the Russian leader, the same guy who invaded Ukraine and is responsible for millions of deaths on both sides of this war. That's a pretty big mistake. And if any other president had made it, it would be a headline for several days and would spark conversations about the president's mental health, certainly a president who had just turned 80. But it didn't, because just a few minutes later, Trump was talking about the latest round of airstrikes that had been launched in Iran and said this.
I told this story yesterday. We had 111 missiles shot by the Islamic Republic of Japan. They were shot at the aircraft carrier.
So again, that's a problem. It's a U.S. president saying a U.S. ally fired missiles at U.S. troops. It's a major international mistake to accuse Japan of something like that. And now, obviously, he just mixed up Iran and Japan because they rhyme, but those countries aren't anywhere close to each other on a map, and more importantly, one is a close ally, and the other we've been locked in a war with for more than a third of the year. It's like he just reached for the closest sounding thing and just said it. And then he left Europe after all of this, boarding the old Air Force One, not his new one, that he got as a definitely not a bribe from the Qatari government. He said it was because the new one was heading to a nearby airbase in England to be shown off to U.S. military members. Just without him on it, he'd catch up later. Reporting, however, suggests that it's because, according to the Associated Press at least, images of the Qatari-gifted jet captured since its unveiling show it is not equipped with some of the same missile detection and countermeasure systems as the older jets, meaning the president has been flying around on a plane that is less safe than it should be in the middle of a war. There was also evidence that the transponder, so the tracking for Air Force One, was shut off near the Turkey-Iran border when Trump flew into Turkey for this NATO meeting, raising some serious security concerns again. He did eventually switch back to the other Air Force One, or I guess Air Force .75, because it's not fully done yet, when he was on his way home from England. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break and come back and talk about Iran because the war is back on, even if Trump isn't declaring it. You know how every social media platform is basically engineered to make you angry and keep you scrolling? That's not an accident. outrage performs better than nuance, so the algorithm feeds you outrage. I see it every day as someone making news content for a living. The loudest, most biased takes get the reach. The careful, fact-driven stuff like I do my best to bring you here gets buried. That's why I joined Say So. It's a brand new news app just launched, built by a group of former journalists and engineers who asked, what if we built news from scratch for people who actually want to be informed instead of people who just want to keep scrolling? No algorithm optimizing for outrage, no AI slop, just vetted creators delivering fact-driven coverage, curated so you can know what's going on in 5 minutes and then get on with your day. If you're the kind of person who is intentional about your sleep, your workouts, your work, what you eat, but your news diet is just whatever your feed throws at you, this is for you. The same energy finally applied to how you stay informed. I'm one of the first creators on Say So, and my favorite feature is that I can link my sources right in the video. That way, you know how I'm telling you the truth. And if you sign up now, you'll be one of the first users to join. You can download Say So. The link is in the show notes and the description. Go check it out and be as smart as you know you are. All right, let's get back to the show. While in Turkey for that NATO meeting, Trump officially declared the ceasefire with Iran over. Here's how he said it.
It's a very interesting question. To me, I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people. And they're vicious, violent people. And if they had a nuclear weapon, they'd use it. As far as I'm concerned, it's over.
There are headlines right now that say the exchange of missiles and munitions is putting the ceasefire or the peace deal talks in jeopardy. And I just don't know how you get that from what you just heard Trump say. The ceasefire is over. He said it. We are still apparently in talks, according to the deal that Trump signed on June 17th. That was supposed to be this deal to end all, be all, mother of all peace deals, but we don't know yet where those stand. I should back up, though. On Tuesday, Iran fired on several ships that were passing through the Strait of Hormuz. We don't entirely know why, but it's most likely because they weren't passing through the Iranian designated shipping lane. That prompted the U.S. to fire missiles back, but this time inside the borders of Iran during the 10-day-long funeral of the Ayatollah that we killed on the first day of the war. Now, the U.S. had made promises to the Iranian negotiators that we wouldn't do this exact thing because the streets are filled with thousands of civilians. But we launched airstrikes anyway, which, to me would mean an end to the ceasefire. But like I've said before in the show, I guess that doesn't mean what it means anymore. And then on Wednesday, Trump said this thing was officially over, meaning the war was back on because we are actively firing at each other. Now, under what authority? None. The White House isn't claiming a War Powers Act authority. Congress obviously didn't approve this thing. There isn't even an operation name to these strikes that are being carried out. And then today, Iran started sending missiles into the countries of Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar, so again threatening to make this a fully Middle Eastern conflict. And because all this was happening now, Israel saw it as a green light to go ahead and continue bombing in Lebanon, which had been stopped during the ceasefire that were literally part of the terms of the deal. This is the kind of thing that people thought might happen from the beginning of the war and when the peace deal, or whatever it is, was signed last month. Giving Iran control of the Strait of Hormuz means that it'll feel like it has the ability to do these things, and that the domino effect that it can cause is massive and almost immediate. And to make matters worse, the U.S. is still running a deep shortage of its missile stockpile, and like I've said before, that will take years to replenish. The Strait of Hormuz is closed once again, though 34 ships did somehow make it through in the last 24 hours or so, but that was kind of before the strait was fully closed, and there are still more than 300 ships waiting, which means a lot of oil is now not getting out. And that brings us to this next thing, that Trump making this ceasefire ending announcement on a Wednesday is a strategic mistake that he doesn't tend to make when markets are involved. You see, the MO of the White House has been to claim the war is over or that there's a deal or whatever on a Friday or maybe a Saturday so the markets rally for the weekend and then open strong on a Monday. But he did this in the middle of the week, and oil immediately shot up and the stock market took a nosedive. I don't know if it was the jet lag or that Trump could feel he wasn't really in control at NATO or he was the butt of quite a few jokes, but this was a misstep that cost him money in the market. And if we know anything about what he cares about in this term specifically, it's been his own bottom line. So this was strange. So what happens next in Iran? We don't know. Trump said this on Air Force .75 on the way home.
We hit back much harder.
Are we returning to a full-scale military conflict, sir?
I don't know. I don't know. But win it very quickly. It's another way of doing it. We have many ways we can win. But we've already won militarily. They have very little. They have very little left. And they want to make a deal so badly. They called a little while ago. They want to make a deal so badly. I just don't know if they're worthy of making a deal. I don't know that they're going to honor the deal. That's the problem.
If they want to make a deal, why do you think they attacked commercial vessels?
Because they're sort of crazy, to be honest with you. They're sort of crazy. They're a little bit out of control, but they want to make a deal. Badly. So,
Trump says they want to make a deal, but also says they're crazy, which is crazy in its own right, because just a few weeks ago, he said this about Iran's leaders.
Bahrain, they didn't have their leaders, but they have a new group of leaders that I think is, I think they're smarter. I think they're very smart. I think they're far less radicalized, and I think they're really good. They love their country. You talk about regime change.
Okay, so how did he go from calling them smart, less radical people to scum and crazy? He said at NATO he got to know them, which opens up two big unanswered questions here. First, has the president been meeting with Iranian leaders without the public knowing? That would seem like a big deal and something that he wouldn't be able to stop talking about if it happened. But he did go to Camp David over Father's Day weekend, which he hates, but is traditionally a place of presidential seclusion and, specifically, Middle Eastern diplomacy. Second, if he just now got to know Iranian leaders by some way, shape, or form, has he not been part of the negotiations like the Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Commerce, and the U.S. lead negotiators have all been saying for months now? Because if he was a part of those things, you'd think he'd know Iranian leadership by now and how they think, and would have some good idea of who they were and wouldn't be able to just switch on a dime. At any rate, it seems like Trump is at the end of his patience with Iran, with Israel, our allies, this war in general, and he would much rather be focused on doing rallies for the midterms and would much rather be puttering around the White House, supervising construction projects around D.C., which are now costing north of $1.2 billion. And just today, crews started work on an overhaul of the White House columns, which will change the entire face of the People's House away from a design that was supposed to reflect a simpler, classical Democratic design to a much more ornate, elitist one. But we don't know what's going to happen next in Iran. Maybe there's a deal, maybe there's not a deal. Maybe by tomorrow we'll get another announcement for the 42nd to 44th time, depending on how you're counting these things, that peace has been achieved in the Middle East and we can all go home happy. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But that is where we are on this Thursday. Please rate or review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe if you're a watcher on YouTube. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, where this week's original reporting is about the new White House report calling the Smithsonian's National American History Museum un-American, and why one of the nation's top historians tells me it's nothing more than a political hit job on one of America's favorite institutions. That is up for free right now because it's our history and it belongs to all of us. And don't worry, paid subscribers, you're getting an extra article this week. And I want to thank some of those paid subscribers as well. A shout out to Savannah Stumpf, Amanda Annandale, that one Irish guy, Jeff Richards, and Sparkplug. You all help keep the show going every week. You can become a paid subscriber for less than $1 a show per month, and you get access to weekly articles, the things you forgot from civics class, and Make It Make Nonsense newsletters. Plus, you support all your regular favorite work that I do here every week. The link to subscribe is in the description. And as always, share the show on social media. I am at Grant Hermes on Twitter, Blue Sky, and the Say So News app, and at Grant_Hermes on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Hermes, and I'll talk to you next time.